This is the Detroit History Podcast. I'm Tim Kiska.
One fall, 30-minute time limit. From Arabia, weighing 220 pounds, the Sheik of Araby.
This was Detroit in the 1960s and well into the 1970s. Almost every other Saturday night, 8,000 wrestling fans, sometimes even more, showed up at air-conditioned Cobo Arena and watched grown men gouge, body slam, dropkick, and pummel each other, sometimes until blood flowed.
Abdul is going for something in his boot. Neither one of these guys are the cleanest wrestlers on earth, Jeff. It's a bloodbath. We were advised to get away from ringside for this match. And we did. We took that advice. Our monitor has been hit, I believe.
Was it fake? Was it real? Did it matter? This was a soap opera with good guys, bad guys, in a morality play that whipped the crowd into full-on bloodlust. And it was a TV show. In this Detroit History Podcast, we'll dissect wrestling in Detroit in the 1960s and how wrestling and TV became dependent upon each other. And as TV demanded more violence, a wrestler by the name of the Sheik was only too happy to oblige. Wrestling historians say it was the Sheik who introduced industrial-sized violence to the show, something that remains to this day. And we'll tell it all by telling the story of the Sheik, one of the most famous bad guys in wrestling history.
You must face the Sheik, the most feared man in wrestling, the man that's been barred from more arenas than any other wrestler.
And we have the bell, once used at Cobo Hall to start and end the matches. We found it in storage at the Detroit Historical Museum and made a tape. That's what you'll be hearing throughout this podcast. The biography of the Sheik tells the story of wrestling in Metro Detroit. Edward Farhat was born in 1926. His father was a Syrian immigrant who had worked at an automotive supply company and worked throughout the Depression. By all accounts, the family enjoyed a comfortable middle-class lifestyle. Ed Farhat was one of 11 kids. After service in World War II, where he fought in Europe under General George S. Patton, Farhat returned to Lansing and took up wrestling. Brian Solomon wrote Blood and Fire, the unbelievable real-life story of wrestling's original Sheik.
Well, he started wrestling professionally in 1947. He was a couple of years out of the Army. He had served in World War II, and he had wrestled a little bit amateur in the Army during World War II. You know, they had their own competitions and things, and he had competed in that and YMCA. And so for a couple of years, he was just wrestling as himself. He was Eddie Farhat from Lansing, the local boy made good. He actually did that until about 49, and then he took on the Sheik persona.
TV was just becoming big. Channel 4 went on the air in 1946, sporadically at first, before going full blast in 1947. The new medium and wrestling immediately developed a symbiotic relationship. TV had time to fill. Wrestling wanted crowds.
Wrestling and boxing were very easy to produce for television. You know, it wasn't a scripted show where you needed to have, actors and scripts and directors and things like that. It wasn't, in terms of doing sports, it was easier than baseball or football or anything where they're covering large stretches of ground and you need multi-cameras. You know, they're in a ring. They're performing the show whether the TV people are there or not. It's going to be happening, and all you got to do is show up and record it with one or two cameras. So it was very easy content for them to fill their schedule with when there wasn't a ton of channels and there wasn't a ton of programming.
Now that wrestling and TV had married, wrestling had to play by a new set of rules. The new medium liked gimmicks. Who would want to see Ed Farhat, the nice guy from Lansing? So Farhat came up with the shtick of all shticks. He became the Sheik. Not to be confused with the more recent Iron Sheik of WWE fame, who died in mid-2023.
His forehead opened up. The Sheik is bleeding profusely from the head. And Von Erich is on his face and can't move.
Kevin Konachek has made a scholarly study of the sport. He says wrestling changed when the TV lights came on.
So basically the idea is that you had the strong men who were showing that the good guys just use strength and feats of strength to defeat the evil. But the Sheik was the first guy to really be like, no, we're going to do some things to make the crowd really hate me on another level. Wrestling doesn't work unless you have a good guy and a bad guy. And the Sheik understood the mental side of wrestling, the psychology, and how to get people to buy tickets. Because at the end of the day, you are only really trying to get people in the door. That's the whole point. You want to make money. And the Sheik found a way to do that. And that was basically getting the crowd to want the good guy to beat him up so badly that his name showing up on a board would just draw crowds alone.
That would be his business model for the rest of his professional life. He was no longer nice guy Ed Farhat from Lansing. He was the Sheik of Araby, the wild man from Syria. The act would have been spoiled if they knew he was a decorated World War II veteran who was, in fact, a Maronite Christian, a product of Lansing area Catholic schools.
From Arabia, weighing 220 pounds, the Sheik of Araby.
The Sheik was doing moderately well in his new persona as a bad guy. But he had his eye on a bigger prize. The wrestling world was broken up into franchise areas. One guy owned all wrestling in Southern California. Another guy owned another area. Solomon says the arrangement was of questionable legality.
You know, the funny thing about all that is the way that the promoters did business. None of this would stand up in a court of law, really. It wouldn't, because they were carving up the country into wrestling territories back then. It was similar almost to like a crime syndicate in just the methodology of it. They were saying, okay, this state is mine, and I'm the official promoter here. No one else can promote here. If they do, we're going to, make it a little difficult for them to do business. That kind of thing is not really, it's kind of frowned upon by, antitrust laws.
Two guys owned wrestling here in Detroit, Jimmy Barrett and Johnny Doyle. They'd promoted 85 wrestling shows at Cobo and Olympia between 1959 and 1964, bringing in nearly 850,000 fans and taking in more than $2 million in the previous 5 years. That's $21 million today. Doyle needed money for a new venture in Australia. He wanted out. So the Sheik stepped up, checkbook in hand, buying the franchise for $50,000. That would be about $492,000 in 2023 money, $10,000 down, $1,000 a month. Farhat showed up at Doyle's Lafayette Towers apartment with his father-in-law in tow, his beard, in case anybody asked, and signed the papers. This made the Sheik, Edward Farhat, a baron of wrestling nationally.
The Sheik in the 60s and 70s, he really became the phenomenon that he was because, and people didn't realize that he was the promoter. He owned the company. So along with a collection of other promoters across North America who formed the National Wrestling Alliance, he was one of the major power brokers of wrestling. And that's really when he's not only running his own territory and main eventing there in Cobo and Olympia and other places, he also tours. So other promoters want to use him. So he goes to Madison Square Garden for Vince McMahon's father. He goes out to California for the promoters there. He goes down to Texas. I mean, he was a huge deal in the Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto. He was in demand.
That contract changed the Sheik's world. He controlled wrestling in Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, and West Virginia. He called the shots. From then on, the Sheik rarely lost because he had the final say over the storylines.
The referee is counting over the Sheik.
My God, Bill, he can't take much more of that.
Chief White Eagle, straddle the Sheik now. They're pummeling each other. An elbow smash, and there's the camel clutch. He's got the camel clutch on him. Look at that expression on the Sheik's face, Jack.
That's it, Bill.
He refuses to release it. He refuses to release it.
Referee Bill Wagner's trying to pull him off by the hand.
He was the guy who ultimately decided who fought whom and who would come out on top. He would deal with Channel 9, which aired big-time wrestling. Here's Dave Grayson Brzezinski, the Sheik's friend and last manager.
Just before he took over the promotion, he was always a mid-card guy, going against, a Jim Hader or a Dominic DeNucci, putting on a show, of course. But when he bought the promotion, well, yeah, you want to be on top. You want to be the main money man, and which he did. And he was the attraction, of course, in this city. And when he did, buy the promotion and put himself on top, he had the United States Heavyweight Championship belt and, went against, the Lord Laytons and the Bobo Brazils and the Haystacks Calhouns of the world.
It became a bi-weekly soap opera, played out on Channel 9's Big Time Wrestling with announcer Lord Ethel Layton, and also played out at Cobo Hall.
He'd, always find a way to win. And that's what brought the people back week after week, or at that time in the mid-60s, the shows were every 2 weeks. Fans, got let down. Oh, darn, who can defeat the Sheik once and for all?
There were several elements to the act. The Sheik never really spoke. His manager, Eddie the Weasel Creechman, did the talking for him.
Well, I've been hurt. I've been hurt a few times. I fall outside of the ring. Some people attacked me a little bit, but nothing very, very serious. I always got through with it. He is violent because he wants to win. And if he wasn't violent, the other wrestler would try to be violent and to overcome the noble Sheik, the United States champion.
When he got into the ring, he would rile up the crowd even more.
Now the Sheik is on that prayer run to seek assistance. He eyes the fans, keeps an eye on the fans, and he is waiting until they give him what he considers his respect.
And then he would get down on his prayer rug and bow, to Allah. And it's like he'd start that and he'd raise his hands, and before he can bring them down, the crowd is already, boo, boo. And he'd stop and he'd look, and it's like, and then his manager, whoever it would be at the time, hey, gestured to the crowd, and, keep quiet. He's trying to pray here.
And he brought his real-life wife into the act. This is something that would never fly in this era. His wife, dressed from head to toe, would enter the ring with her husband.
Well, she's completely veiled, isn't she? I didn't see her face, Jack.
Can you imagine the arrogance of the Sheik? He makes this woman kiss his boot.
First and foremost, his wife Joyce was his very first manager, Princess Salama. And she would come out in like these robes covered, and she'd be burning incense. So this incense would be billowing, in the TV studio and in the arenas. And what he would used to do is like not beat her, but he'd browbeat her and, give her commands to get down and bow before him, which drew heat with the crowd.
He liked attaching a razor blade to a number 2 pencil.
And there's always going to be a time where he digs out his famous number 2 pencil. He's got this tape pencil hidden in his boot, and he starts gouging into his opponent's neck or his head, and here comes the blood. The fans are just incensed.
Kevin Konachek identifies what really galled Detroiters. The Sheik cheated. That was his act. Now, cheating goes against everything in Detroit's self-image. We believe ourselves to be an honest people doing tough, gritty jobs.
And Detroit in general, from a sports perspective, has always been this gritty powerhouse place. The people of Detroit work for their living. They work for everything they got. They are the blue collar of the blue collar. And the Sheik cheated at every single opportunity. So the people of Detroit probably saw it even more of an offense to them because he was just taking every shortcut under the sun and giving them an opportunity to boo him.
The chief is dazed. The referee is counting over the chief for being outside the ring. Now, the Sheik is biting him. He's biting him.
George Byer grew up on the East Side and watched wrestling as a youngster. He describes what would typically happen.
You know, the manager quite often would distract the referee. So he was cheating in plain view. Everybody in the house, except the guy in control, the referee, he didn't know anything was going on. No, the whole house knew what was going on. All right, the referee turns around, looks at the crowd, and the next thing you know, he's pulling a flamethrower out of his trunks and blasting the guy, you know?
Managing the Sheik, I always said, it's always easy, going out to the ring, but getting back to the dressing room after, you won, scary. There's been times I've been kicked and punched and spit at. I've been stabbed once. It's very scary being a manager because you're outside the ring. And if you incense that crowd too much, you can start a riot.
A veteran of the ring, the Sheik, has wrestled around this world for many years, and it has been the same story wherever he goes.
He was a star, riding the crest of the wave created by television. That created its own set of problems.
If fans knew that, oh, this is just Eddie Farhat from Lansing, if that was common knowledge, his business would dry up. He would not have been the monumental draw that he was. He wouldn't have been able to travel the world and headline and main event, so he guarded that.
This is a vicious hold, and I have not seen it for some time, but I don't like it.
As far as anybody knows, Farhat never granted any interviews. When Brian Sullivan worked on his book, he tried to arrange interviews with the Sheik's two sons. Those interviews never happened.
He's somebody that he grew up in a very large family, the 10th of 11, the youngest son, an immigrant family, and they were probably what you'd call middle class, but he had a little bit more of an edge than some of his brothers and sisters did. He didn't have the same level of education that they had. He was a little more streetwise. So he was a guy that was perfectly suited for a business like wrestling, where you really need to know how to take care of yourself, make sure you wouldn't be taken advantage of,
Wrestling became quite a lucrative operation. Now that he was in charge, the Sheik decided he would need a permanent good guy, a guy he would wrestle often and develop a storyline around the rivalry.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, once again, I want to introduce the United States Heavyweight Wrestling Champion, Bobo Brazil. Bobo.
Hello, ladies.
Welcome.
Very popular star. He's what they call in wrestling a babyface. He had been established for years. And also in those days, to have a main event black babyface in wrestling was not very common. And especially one that was beloved by fans of all races, which he was. There was no racial animosity. It was a very appealing idea, especially in an area like Detroit, which is racially diverse. So this was an idea that he hit on, and they really struck gold with it for years and years.
Bobo Brazil says he's going to beat Satan right out of the Sheik tonight.
Let me tell you something, Bobo Brazil. When the noble Sheik gets a hold of you tonight, he's going to crush you, terrorize you, murder you, tear you apart. Bobo Brazil, there'll be nothing left of you when the Sheik gets his hands on you. No more Bobo Brazil.
That enmity between the Sheik and Bobo Brazil was humming along quite nicely. July 22nd, 1967, Wrestling Night. A crowd of 7,221 at Cobo Hall. The Sheik was fighting Bobo Brazil. The Sheik punched a referee and was disqualified. As the crowd cleared out of Cobo Hall, a party was going on at a print shop at 12th and Claremont. Illegal booze was being sold. Cops raided the joint. A crowd gathered. Thus began the 1967 Detroit riot or rebellion. 43 people died. The U.S. Army flew in with tanks to calm things down. The Sheik and Bobo Brazil were to wrestle at Cobo a week after the disturbance. A white guy wrestling a black guy in this city's racially supercharged atmosphere?
And now you have the return match of the Sheik and Bobo Brazil at Cobo coming up. The Sheik told me many years later, with the riots going on and stuff, if he was to beat Bobo again, who knows what would have happened. everybody, every nationality would come to watch big time wrestling. And what happened that night is that the crowd, they're cheering for Bobo. So we were all one person. We were all one ethnicity at that time. The original thing was to come back 2 weeks later in a cage match. So the Sheik and Bobo were both going to get disqualified. But the Sheik, figured, let me try to heal the city this way. And what ended up happening...
To stop this man, to retain his title. He has the Sheik's head across the rope, choking the breath, trying to slow the Sheik down, in hopes that he can pin the Wild Syrian and keep that United States heavyweight belt where he feels it belongs, with the people around his waist. Creechman now really worried as he stands ringside. His man, the Sheik, is in trouble.
The Sheik had Brazil in a camel clutch. But with the crowd egging him on, Brazil broke that hold and administered a series of cocoa butts.
He let Bobo beat him for the title, which made the fans go nuts, and it was the first time that he had lost the title belt since he bought the promotion. It's been said that the Sheik helped heal Detroit at a dark time.
So why did we go in big for something that was quite clearly fake? George Beyer grew up in what was then East Detroit, later East Point. Beyer sees this from the point of view of growing up in a working-class suburb in the 1960s.
So growing up, though, I was captivated by these big hulks rolling around on the ring and threatening each other during their promos. I thought that was the best part, when they do the promos for the upcoming show or the upcoming event, and they'd get on and talk about how they were wronged and how somebody else cheated and what a rat they were and how they were going to get them and rip them apart, try and sell some tickets. That's pretty funny stuff.
Beyer did the Bruiser voice for 22 years on 4 radio stations. Most significantly, Beyer didn't have to explain the joke. Everybody got it.
It is a poor man's opera. You don't have to speak Italian. You don't have to rent a tuxedo to go to La Scala, and you don't have to worry about spilling any brie on said tuxedo. So all you need is a bag of chips and a bottle of Stroh's, and you can get away for a while. It's just cheap entertainment.
Wrestling was one of the top things on television. I think it's hard for people to appreciate that now, how big it was. Sometimes if you go back and you watch some kind of pop culture things from that era, whether it be sitcoms, cartoons, and movies and things, you'll get references to wrestling because of how ubiquitous it was and how everyone was watching it.
The thing about entertainment is this. The audience is always looking for something new. They'd seen enough camel clutches and cocoa butts. The crowds dwindled. At its height, big-time wrestling could get a crowd at Cobo Hall. At the end, the grappling took place at Lincoln Park Community Center. But the Sheik was still a big star overseas.
There was a promoter named Atsushi Onita who begged him to come to Japan in like 91. And that's where he spent the next 4 years wrestling, and he was in his 60s. But he was being offered $10,000 a match. Now, this is not the kind of money that wrestlers make at all. Even today, he was coming home with his boots in his luggage filled with cash. And this kind of money was helping to deal with expenses, to make sure that he could stay in his house. He was trading on his status as a wrestling legend.
I remember his, last match. He couldn't even get in the ring anymore. He couldn't climb the ring step. In Japan, he couldn't get into the ring, so he rolled into the ring. Just his body had just taken 40, 50 years of punishment, and people say how wrestling is fake. Well, it's not fake. I want to see a normal human being that says that, jump off the top rope onto the arena floor, take a backflip off the top rope, and land on, a wrestling ring that's basically boards, and very little padding. I mean, it takes a toll on your body.
The Sheik died in 2003 at the age of 76. Brian Solomon summarizes the Sheik's legacy.
For younger people and for fans, it's important to understand that this man was one of the biggest stars that professional wrestling ever produced. He was a main event, top box office draw in the industry for years on end, and he did it as a bad guy, which in wrestling's called a heel, which is a lot harder to do because most of the top draws were the good guys. With Sheik, it was more like he got people to hate him so much that they had to come and see if he was going to lose. That's a lot harder of a thing to do consistently. Heels in wrestling always talk about this idea of heat. Like a heel has, you build up heat with the crowd. And heat is very hard to maintain. You build it up, it gets really hot, and then it has to eventually break, and somebody beats you, and you go on your merry way, and maybe you go wrestle somewhere else. So to preserve that heat for year after year after year in all these different places is an incredible accomplishment.
Kevin Konachek explains the Sheik's influence on wrestling today.
He was one of those characters that truly had the people in the audience believing that everything they saw was real. The original Sheik goes down as one of the guys that you can go back and say he really was a true originator of some of the things that you saw, some of the violence, some of the hardcore aspects of wrestling, some of the villainous side of wrestling. He was known for constantly cutting his opponent. He was a very prolific, what they called blading. So he would take a pencil with a razor blade on the end of it and basically cut his opponent, create color or blood. And that was something unique and new. It had not really been seen a whole lot in the professional wrestling industry. And it was something that everyone kind of latched onto when you start seeing some of the more violent side of things. And the Sheik can absolutely be credited as being one of the innovators of that style. And it's actually something that you're starting to see come back to television in the last 2 or 3 years with the creation of some of the new wrestling promotions.
There is one physical reminder: the Sheik's old house near Lansing.
Sort of like a 40-room estate on like 25 acres of land. That was the Sheik's house. That's where he lived at that time. And so often he would allow wrestlers to stay there.
It's now the Wheatfield Inn in Williamston near Lansing and has been valued at more than $1 million. And let's let the Bruiser take us out.
I'm going to be there Saturday night at 8 o'clock at the air-conditioned Como Arena, and I'm going to get the Baron, and when he tries to put that claw on me, I'm going to bite it. And then I'm going to grab his arm and twist it around his neck, and then I'm going to smash him into the turnbuckle, and then I'm going to throw him over the ropes, and then I'm going to really go after him, and I'm taking care of the Baron. I don't care. He's a rat. He's a no-good bluff. I'm going to get him. I'm telling you, Lord Layton. And then after that, I'm going to go after that Tim Kiska. Tim Kiska has been a charlatan in Detroit.
This being a collaborative effort, here's who's on the team. Eric Kiska, Associate Producer, Managing Editor and Social Media Director. Bob Koski, Associate Producer and Audio Engineer. Kelly Kiska, Web and Graphic Design. Bill Kubota, Video. And Tony Motley, Marketing Director. I'm Tim Kiska, the writer, narrator, and executive producer.
Bobo Brazil. Bobo Brazil rocked the Cocoa Butt, his feared finishing move. Ask Leaping Larry Shane after his missed flying head scissors. Ask Killer Kowalski after he lost his grip on the claw. Ask Dick the Bruiser after his top rope knee drop went wide. Ask the Sheik after his concealed lighter fluid soaked fireball got lost in his trunks. Ask two tag team midgets, Fuzzy Cupid and Sky Low Low, ordered out of the dressing room on a slow, dull night at the air-conditioned Cobo Arena for comic relief in an undercard snoozer, to sprint into the ring, to taunt, to circle dance around the dazed Bobo, down on his knees, dog-tired, his opponent tangled in the turnbuckle, but in the right position for midget height, to deliver the cocoa butt to their sweet spot. Ask them all who delivered their first concussion, who set in motion early onset dementia. Search out their graves or scattered cremains and ask the dust about Bobo Brazil, who checked out after suffering a series of strokes.